Hi guys, Andrew here. We got the solar eclipse coming up in 2 weeks and I'm going to be going to see it. So I've been sort of prepping my camera gear, building what amounts to filters from solar film bought from either Thousand Oak Optics or Bader, or Bader, I don't know how you say it, B-A-A-D-E-R. I've got both films and I built a filter a while back for my 70-200. Nikon 70-200, I guess I should show it down here. And my original filter was, you know, a little bit rough. I've got a protector in the front of it. Made out of cardboard. I've since made these protectors to go on the front of it, so I gotta transport them. And I didn't think about it while I was remaking all my other ones. I made 4 or 5 of them. Made one for the telescope behind me. One for each of my telephoto lenses I'll be using that day. But I think I'm gonna rebuild this one for my 70-200 because this is my original one. The film's getting a little old and it's kind of dusty. So I thought I would go through that build right now. So the basic principle on these is you've got 2 sheets of foam core with a circular hole cut in the center and then some poster board cut and run into a ring and then taped to the sides. So it's not a terribly complicated device. You kind of got to be in like a grade school craft mindset to do it, but for whatever reason, my solar eclipse talk, and I'll put the link to that somewhere on the screen where it makes sense. At Precision the other day, this was one of the things that got the most questions is how to build this, and it's kind of a visual thing, so I figured why not go through it face to face. So I'm going to rebuild the one for this 70-200 just to show you how it works. It just slips on the front of the lens element and it's secure. It can't fall off, so I don't have to worry about it coming off spontaneously in the wind or whatever. And then at totality, all I do is pull it off. I can photograph totality, slip it right back on. I don't have to worry about tape letting go. A lot of people are saying, oh, just use tape or tape it to the hood. The fundamental problem with the hood is when you unsnap it, you can rock the camera, which with 500, 800, 1000 millimeter can change your point of aim enough to lose the sun. So I like something that's I can do very gently, which this can, and I don't have to worry about falling off. So to start with today, I've got a couple of things. I've got a compass for making circles of a fixed size, X-Acto knife with a new blade. If you try to cut foam core with an old blade, it'll tear the foam core. So if it's tearing your foam core, even if the blade is pretty new, throw it away and get a new one. I buy them by the 100 pack. And then I've got some scrap foam core. I got a couple pieces here, just left over from matting or whatever. And so I set it aside when I do that. They happen to be big enough. In this case, I'm gonna duplicate the size of my previous filter, and that's 5 by 5. So you need at least a 5 by 5 square. And when you decide what size to do that, what I do is I measure the front element and just take a ruler, nothing fancy, and just very carefully to make sure you don't scratch it, just kind of measure. So the opening on this is 3 1/4-ish inches. You can look at the filter thread size if you wanted 77 millimeter or whatever that is, 72 in this case, 77 in this case, and convert that. That's about 3 inches. So you want the hole to be about the same size as that. Then you want the outside of your square to be on the order of 1 inch bigger on both sides. So that's 3 inches, 5 inches. So 3 plus 2 inches, 1 inch on either side is 5 inches. So I'm just gonna pick out the best 2 pieces of this scrap foam core I have. Okay. I guess the other thing I should say you need solar film, which you can get from, well, you could get, it's getting really hard to get, so if you don't have yours already, you may have trouble getting this for this eclipse, but here's a little scrap, and it's silver on one side, black on the other. This is the Thousand Oak Optics. The Bader is silver and silver. There are different varieties. The black on the back is nice because it should prevent reflections. Although one of the advantages of this scheme is that it blocks all the light around it, so you don't have to worry about light getting between your film and your lens element, which means you have less likelihood of there being a reflection and being able to see the front of your lens in there because of a gap in your hood or whatever. So I'm just going to set this aside for now because that's the last thing we need. So the first step is to cut these squares down to the correct dimension. And there's a couple things I could do. So these happen to be six inches on the one edge. So rather than try to cut these down to 5 inches, I'm just going to go with a 6-inch one, which happens to be the same size I've used on all these other ones. I've got a bunch of them that I made, and that'll just make life easy because they're all the same size. So I'm using, this is a sewing ruler designed for marking out like fabric and stuff for quilts. Let's scrap. There's one 5x5 square. So I'm going to look at this and pick the edges that are the nicest to keep. This ruler is basically 6 inches wide, so all I have to do is put these two edges against it, and you can see there's a 6 right here. Cut that. So now if you look at that, I should have two 6x6-inch squares. Not a big deal. So next step, let's find the center, which you can do by connecting the corners. And you don't have to put a line all the way across, but I do just because that way it lets me see that it hits the corners correctly. So not super complicated. Once I have that, I can draw my circle. I'm going to go ahead and mark both. Okay, so there's those. So I decided the diameter of the lens opening is going to be 3 1/4 or thereabouts, which means my radius is going to be half that, so 1 1/2 plus 1/8. Right there. So I just took my compass and opened it up until it matches, and then, as they say in woodworking, measure twice, cut once. Put the centering point right on the center mark, drag a circle, repeat. So this part will be a little bit tedious, and it's the part that requires a little bit of hand-eye coordination. So we're going to cut this circle out. And I'm just going to cut it using an X-Acto knife. Nice sharp blade. I try to keep the blade as vertical as possible, so not tilted over to one side or the other so that I'm cutting straight through. I don't have a bevel. That's pretty hard to do. And I'm just going to go slow. And I find it's helpful not to try to cut all the way through the first pass with foam core. I just cut the top layer of paper and a little bit of the foam. And then on the second pass, when I have to use more force, that first cut will help guide the X-Acto knife just a little bit. Okay, there's two of those. They go together, put the rings together, there you go. It's always good to take your lens, do a sanity check. It's not super critical that these be exact because that outside edge of the lens is not going to have much effect the way we're going to be shooting. But as you can see, they line up pretty well. Good. So the next step, now we're going to mount our solar film. So you need about 1/2 inch on either edge of this, circle to tape things down. So I'm going to take my solar film. So that piece is obviously not big enough. And I'm hoarding this because it's hard to get right now. Look at that piece, that's more than big enough, so we're gonna cut that piece down. Now there's a crease in this that it came with, and I'm gonna try to make it to where that crease is not over the hole. So that hole is 3 1/4 across. So if we go 4 1/4, that gives me a good 1/2 inch on either side. So I'm gonna cut this 4 1/4 square. And this is the corner I'm gonna use over here. You can see a little crease right there maybe. And I can get a 4 1/4 square where that'll be outside the visual area. So this is marked off in 1/4 inch, 1/8 inch increments. So I just put that along this edge, line that line up. This is definitely a measure twice, cut once type of deal, because this is the last piece of this I have and it's out of stock everywhere. So 4 1/4. You don't have to press hard here at all when you do this, because it just interestingly, it didn't this time. Usually you just barely touch it and it cuts. There we go. So there's one dimension. I'll cut the other dimension. Same principle. If you cut a little oversized, it's not the end of the world. 1, 2, 3, 4 1/4 is the blue line. That's better. And now I've got a little one. I could make one for 50 millimeter or something if I wanted to protect one of those. Put the scrap away. So now what you do is you set this on here and you can center it very easily because you've got these 4 diagonal lines. So the other thing I'm going to use is this is vinyl mounting tape that I use for mounting prints in mats. It's acid free, but more importantly it holds onto paper and plastic really well and never lets go. So I trust it to hold the film in here. So now I'm going to take this. Now, as soon as you touch this, it's going to grab it. So you want to keep everything tight and do that right there. So now I introduced a little bit of a wrinkle there. We're going to take that out by pulling this way. We're going to try to have this film as flat as possible. It's not super critical. My original one is real loose. And it technically creates some flaring and some interesting artifacts, except your exposure is so down and you're photographing just the brightest parts of the sun that really nothing else shows up. Like it just doesn't, it's just not visible. Okay. Again, the size of these pieces is kind of up to you. It doesn't have to be huge. A lot of these, I just put these 4 pieces. Grab it, pull a little bit just to pull the tension. You could use masking tape, but I find that masking tape tends to let go. And my last piece. Okay, so we have the black on this side, silver on this side. So that's that. We take our other piece. I like to put the pencil marks to the inside so they're not obvious. So now I've sandwiched those two together. I just set them on top of each other. If you hold this up to your eye and look through the black side, you can maybe see a light bulb through it directly if you're close. Okay. So now what we're going to do is we're going to tape these 2 pieces together. So I cut a nice length of this. I'll go to my top piece. I just catch the edge, maybe a 1/4 inch. Set these 2 up vertical so they're aligned. Fold this over. Fold it over. So there's one side. And if you do what I just did there and miss, just cut it. Actually got the alignment off. We'll just do it again over the top of that. Go. So that's now a sandwich not coming apart. So I put 4 pieces of tape on my film. For a small one like this, that's fine. If you're making something really big, like for a super telephoto, or in this case, a big telescope, not a big telescope, but a telescope, I actually put 8 pieces of tape. I put it on the diagonal corners, plus all the square edges to make sure it's nice and taut, stays flat. Again, that doesn't seem to be all that critical, but I find that it's better to be safe than sorry. Okay, so now we've gotten this done. So now the next step is to make the ring to hold it to the camera. Before we start, make sure you put, if you have a film that's got 2 sides, silver and a black, you put the black side towards your camera. If your film doesn't have 2 obvious sides, make sure it's not directional. Some of them are directional. This one, for example, you want to put the black side towards the camera, the silver side towards the sun. Read the paperwork that came with your film. It should have come with film. So I'm going to set this aside for now. So the next step, now we need to make this little ring right here, which we're just going to make from a strip of poster board, or really any lightweight cardboard you have lying around. And how wide you make this is sort of up to you. I'm going to make mine about 4 inches wide. Much wider than that, it just gets, it's too deep. You can see this one's probably 2.5 inches. So we're gonna make this one. Yeah, we'll make it 3.5 inches. Seems like a good number. It just needs to be deep enough to fit firmly over the front of your lens. And if you're like me and your cutting board's too narrow, make sure you don't cut your table, because then your wife gets upset. There we go. So the easiest way to determine your radius, or your circumference, is just to set this over the front of the lens and wrap it around. And you want to make sure that these edges are parallel when it comes through. See how this kind of tapers this way? That's wrong. It'll be a cone then. If these 2 edges line up over the distance, that means you have a true circle and not a cone. And you don't want it to be a cone because you can have it, it has a direction then and it may not fit on the camera well. So what I do is I just put this on here. I put this side about right like that. Pull that up. And then I usually want about 1.5 inches overlap, and I just kind of mark. This isn't super important. So you could use a tape measure, like a clothing tape measure, to measure your circumference. It's a lot better to test because you're going to want it to be snug, so I always fit it as I go. So there's how wide this is going to be. And I'm just going to cut that at a right angle. Viola, that's scrap. The next step is I'm going to run a line, just a reference line, maybe 1/2 inch up from the lower edge, just with a pencil. Okay, what that is that's a cut line. So what I'm going to do with that line is I'm going to nick this so that when I curl it in a circle I can tape it down, and you'll see what I mean there. So just about every 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch, just cut right up to that line. This doesn't have to be super fussy. It can be really approximate because it'll still curl in a circle as long as these are cut on a reasonably small interval. Okay, bring your lens back in. And then what I do is I put it here. Line these edges up, and you don't want it super tight. So before we do that, I'm going to cut a piece of tape. You just need a piece long enough to cover like 2/3 of that. I'm just going to go ahead and made mine a little long. That's okay. Go ahead and put that down, and don't cover the tabs you cut. Just tape it down so that it's up here. So as you put this on here, you can pull it really tight. That's not what you want. You want it just a little bit loose so it'll slip on and off. And again, you want to make sure this edge is lined up. And then just take that tape, press it down. If it's a little snug coming off, it's probably because it's a little bit spiraled. Sorry, a little bit cone shaped. You can always cut it and loosen it up a little bit if you need to. There you go. So now I just have this tube I've made. Take all these tabs and fold them out. So that'll sit just like that. Bring in your filter ring you made. Put the camera side up, the black side in this case. Set this on top. This is not going to be super round because the overlap won't be round. But what you're going to do is you're going to try to get it as centered as possible. And you're going to start taping it down with just little pieces of the same tape. Vinyl tape, again, works really well. You could even use something like Scotch tape. And you can stick these to the tabs and then move it around and get it really centered. So what I did there, I tried to get that as close to centered as possible. So now I go to the other side. .180 degrees from that one, and I just try to make it pretty even. Good. And just repeat going around until it's taped down. So there we go. So it may actually be a little bit snug. So I might actually consider loosening that up. It seems a little bit on the snug side. Yeah. Just take my razor blade and slit that piece of tape. Just loosen the top up. And this will make it a little spiral, but or little cone, but it's not the end of the world. So now, because I can see exactly where it was, I'll just open it up just a little bit. There we go. Much better. So there you go, slips right on. Slips right off. Now as a bonus, you can cut another, take some more scrap, cut a square. All I did with these is I put some Velcro, self-adhesive Velcro on, and then you have a lens cover for it. So there you go. So if you're heading to watch the eclipse, this will help protect your camera pre and post totality. But you can also use this to photograph the sun, photograph sunspots on any given day in your backyard or wherever you are. Or if we have something again like the Venus transit, which happened a few years back, you can use your super telephoto and photograph the sun and see Venus crossing the face of the sun. So there you go, have fun.